Last week, I shared a little bit about my story, why I'm back behind the microphone to make a podcast, what's different, the purpose of this podcast. Today, I want to dive a little bit deeper, specifically into talking about how to find a middle ground with food. I want to talk about my journey with intuitive eating, what I loved about it, what I realized I needed to add to my toolbox to create a more sustainable and structured approach to health. So I'm excited about today. Welcome back to the Hey Steph podcast. I'm so glad you're here. I'm Stephanie Webb. You can call me Steph. I'm a holistic nutritionist and an eating psychology coach, and I love to chat. So I'm really happy, and I appreciate those of you who commented, sent me messages on Instagram. I got so many kind, positive, encouraging messages, and it just made me really happy to hear that little episode was already helpful for you. It really just means so much to me. So thank you for reaching out. Always love to hear from you, and I so much appreciate that. So this episode is especially for those of you who have followed me for a while, but I think those of you who are new to me, if there are any of you, hopefully will find some benefit here as well. Maybe you worked with me before, maybe you were in our coaching membership, maybe you listened to my previous podcast, Nutrition Redefined. You're, I don't know, in some way influenced by what I shared in the past. I want to honor that connection and what I taught you then, and also offer some transparency about what has changed for me since then. If you've ever felt like something was missing in your approach to food, maybe you feel like, I need more structure, and I don't want to fall back into dieting extremes or restriction or triggering old habits, I hope you'll find something today that is helpful for you. So let's talk a little bit about intuitive eating. I was a certified intuitive eating counselor, I think was the official title, intuitive eating counselor, intuitive eating coach. And for those of you who don't know, intuitive eating is not just an idea. It is a specific framework. I have the book right here. It is a trademarked term. It is a specific framework made up of 10 principles designed to help you build a healthier relationship with food, let go of dieting, and reconnect with your body's natural signals. And as I mentioned last week, intuitive eating was exactly what I needed. After years of dieting and veganism, Weight Watchers, all the things, I was really stuck in this cycle of dieting and failing and blaming myself, and I felt like I was the problem, I was broken. When I discovered intuitive eating, it felt like a lifeline. It gave me permission to stop blaming myself and instead turn my frustration toward diet culture. I had something I could say directly. It wasn't me, it was this. I wasn't the problem. And it was very helpful to me. It was very healing to me. I was able to let go of so much guilt and shame around food in my body and stop obsessing over what I ate. Psychologically and emotionally, intuitive eating was very healing for me, and it gave me tools, specific tools to make peace with food, honor my hunger, trust my body. And I had the privilege of working with many women who benefited from this approach. And I will always be grateful for that time in my life, for what it did for me and what I feel like the good that it did for women that I worked with as well. And as my journey progressed, I realized that I needed something more. Intuitive eating is specifically so helpful for people who have had really terrible and traumatic, with a little t, experiences around food, with restriction, with dieting, with the food police, with potentially eating disorders, disordered eating. Intuitive eating is transformative for that. I think what I found is that it's for everyone, and I think these principles apply to everyone. And I feel like where I struggled, and where a lot of the women that I worked with struggled, was finding, what does this mean for those of us who don't struggle with over-restriction, who have not had a restrictive eating disorder, but those of us who actually need more structure around food? That was always a tricky balance for me, because it involved saying, trust your body, when what I felt like people were actually asking for wasn't an ambiguous, fluffy, hard to define concept of trusting your body. It was like, give me actual behaviors and templates. And I know that I was able to do that. We were able to do that. And I also know that it may have not felt like enough. So I do want to say that for overall health and the prevention of eating disorders, intuitive eating is incredible. I would highly recommend, no matter who you are, that you read this book, Intuitive Eating. I think there's so much to learn from the principles of intuitive eating, from the scientific backing for these principles. So much good stuff in here. I want to quickly go over the 10 principles of intuitive eating so you have some context around what that means. When I'm saying intuitive eating, it's not just get in touch with your body. Like it's specific parameters that involves. I want to be clear about that. So here are the 10 principles of intuitive eating. I'm going to read directly from the book for these 10 principles of intuitive eating. Principle number 1, reject the diet mentality. This means letting go of the belief that your worth is tied to your size or that it's tied to following someone else's rules for how you should eat. There is no, and I still believe this now, there is no one black and white perfect template that you can apply to every single meal you will eat for the rest of your life. Dieting, the diet mentality can only get you so far. At some point, the real you will take over. So I love this one, reject the diet mentality. Principle number 2, honor your hunger. This involves tuning into your body's hunger signals, feeding yourself consistently. Love this. Number 3, make peace with food. This means stop labeling foods as good or bad. Stop moralizing foods and release the guilt around eating. Number 4, challenge the food police. I love the term food police. I think immediately we all know what this means. This principle means pushing back against critical voices, internal, external voices that tell you how you have to eat in order to be quote unquote successful. Number 5, discover the satisfaction factor. Satisfaction is huge. Our relationship with food is not just, again, black and white. It's not just science-based. There's so much about satisfaction that is emotional, that is psychological. Eating foods you enjoy is such a key part of satisfaction. Principle number 6, feel your fullness. Pay attention to your body's cues to tell you when you've had enough. I love this one as well. Number 7, cope with your emotions without using food. This is a hard one. I think this is one of the hardest. Finding non-food related ways to deal with stress or boredom or other emotions. Addressing emotional eating. Principle number 8, respect your body. I love this one too. Accept your body as it is right now, even if it's not where you want it to be. Number 9 is movement. This is about exercise. They say movement, feel the difference, and focusing on how movement feels rather than using exercise as punishment. And lastly, number 10, honor your health with gentle nutrition. This is a principle that teaches you how to make food choices that honor your health while allowing for flexibility. I want to say right off the bat, I disagree with none of these. Maybe I should rephrase that. I agree with all of these. These 10 principles helped me heal my relationship with food, helped me step away from diet culture. They taught me that my body was not something to fight against. It was not my enemy. It was something to nourish and respect. So I want to be very clear publicly, I endorse intuitive eating. I love it. Now, I want to transition into where I felt like it wasn't quite the end of the road for me. Like I mentioned last episode, when I closed my business and stepped away from publicly coaching other people and talking about food, I had more space in my brain to reflect on my own habits and my own health. And I realized there were areas I wanted to do better. I talked last week about those 3 specific turning points for me. I want to tell you today about 2 major tools that I added to my toolbox that made all of the difference. And I want to preface this by saying I still 100% believe in flexibility. I in no way am trying to promote perfectionism or all or nothing thinking. And in fact, just as much as before, I am against those things. And the things I'm going to talk about are very often married to perfectionism and all or nothing thinking. So I hope what you can hear in this podcast is the distinction where I'm taking these tools that diet culture often uses as weapons against ourselves. And I found, and I don't think I'm the first person to have done this by any stretch of the imagination. I hope to be able to clarify that a little bit for you without throwing out the baby with the bathwater. It's like such a horrible saying. But instead of throwing out all the things, using these with the approach of flexibility to find more success with your health, with your goals, whatever that looks like, even if that goal is weight loss. And I do think, let me also say, I think one of the main ideas that eventually propelled me away from being all in on intuitive eating was that I felt like my desire to change my body, my desire to lose excess weight was in direct opposition to the guiding principles of where intuitive eating is coming from. Intuitive eating explicitly states, the founders of intuitive eating say they're not anti-weight loss. They are anti the pursuit of weight loss. That was where I had to break off because I wanted to feel better in my body, and I knew that that meant finding a way to pursue weight loss in a flexible way, in a way that worked for me, in a way that didn't throw out intuitive eating, but also maybe pulled some of these principles of, yes, dieting without the diet mentality. I don't even know if this makes sense, but this was pivotal for me. So back to these two tools, these major tools that I added that made such a huge difference for me. And again, these tools with the approach of flexibility always. Number one is food tracking. I know that food tracking is seen as the opposite of intuitive eating. It's viewed so often as restrictive, obsessive, something that disconnects you from your body. And that's how I felt about it too. I would have absolutely discouraged someone from tracking their food. If you listen to my old podcast, you know that I did that very thing. I interviewed people who had left macro counting and had converted to intuitive eating. And it was kind of this like, oh, I can't believe people do that. How can people track their food and think that that's having a healthy relationship with food? I did not see the nuance in it. And once I started practicing it, I was like, oh, okay, I get it. Intuitive eating, again, helped me let go of that guilt, heal my relationship with food, but I needed more structure. I needed more clarity and direction. And that's when I started thinking about this middle ground. And intuitive eating, I think, for a lot of people is a middle ground. But I needed more structure in my middle ground than maybe intuitive eating was like cheering for, right? I needed to track my food and I knew that. And so I took what I had learned from intuitive eating and added food tracking, and it helped me even more feel intentional around food and in control around food. And yes, more in touch with my body. I know it's kind of crazy, and I wouldn't have believed me if I had said that to me 3 or 4 years ago. And I have found that to be 100% the case for me. I don't know if that will be the case for you. Your relationship with food is so unique to you, and it's all you. You know, you got to do what you want to do. But I want to tell you that food tracking was really important for me. And if you're looking for more structure, that might be a tool you want to explore. When I started tracking my food, like I said, it came from a completely different mindset. It started with a health concern after learning, after a blood test from a physical, that my cholesterol was higher than I wanted. And as a nutritionist, I knew that focusing on fiber could help, but I didn't know how much fiber I was eating. So I downloaded MyFitnessPal and I started tracking, not to restrict my food, but to learn, to gather data about what I was doing. And I found that I was not getting enough fiber, and I wasn't eating as much protein as I thought and as I wanted, and that my meals were often not meeting my nutritional needs. So tracking my food helped me see where I could make these small intentional changes to feel better. It was not about cutting calories. I did not go into tracking my food and set super low numbers or overhaul my diet. It was about awareness, self-awareness, not self-punishment. The number 2 tool that I eventually came to was reducing ultra-processed foods. This was another big shift. And in intuitive eating, like I mentioned, we often talk about food neutrality, not moralizing food. No food is good or bad. And I still believe that. I don't think we should moralize food. And I think that conversation and that discussion around there is no good or bad food can often lead people to feeling like, well, okay, all foods fit, which is true, but then it leaves you feeling very lacking in structure. It leaves you feeling like, well, if I don't determine something as good or bad, how do I decide what to eat? And you're left with the guiding principle of what tastes good. We have this scale whereby we make food decisions of what feels good and what tastes good. And I think it's really difficult to find the balance to err on the side of what feels good when there is such a lack of structure and a lack of actual data. I know now from research, from books that I've read, but most importantly from my own lived experience, which is what I am speaking from, that eating so much ultra-processed foods was absolutely screwing up my hunger and fullness signals. I could not even implement the practices of intuitive eating as effectively as I wanted, tuning into my hunger and fullness, when what I was eating wasn't really food. Now, and I'm saying that, I'm just like throwing that out there. Like Doritos are not really food, guys. Like they're it's a food-like substance. Now, with that said, am I saying you're such a bad person for eating Doritos or Oreos or whatever packaged food? No, you are not a bad person. And that food is getting you nowhere. It is not serving you. You could eat endless Doritos and never feel full and satisfied, ever. And I don't know that anyone would argue with that. I think the problem comes in when the rubber hits, when the rubber meets the road, where it's like, okay, Doritos are allowed, Oreos are allowed, and what do I do with that? So for me, one of the biggest shifts was being really honest with myself about how these highly processed, ultra-processed foods were affecting my body. I do not believe, and I am not telling you that all of your food needs to be 100% perfect or free from all processed ingredients. That's not realistic and that's not necessary. But I also know that when I over-relied on those foods, and that definition of over-relied changed for me over time, and it's going to be different for you wherever you are right now, it threw off my hunger and fullness signals and left me just feeling kind of blah. It wasn't great for my digestion. There were a lot of ways that I was suffering, and I use that word like loosely. I wasn't like suffering, like not suffering with a capital S. But physical symptoms that I experienced started getting dramatically better, particularly in relation to my digestion, when I stopped eating so much of those. When my middle ground became prioritizing whole, nutrient-dense, real foods. Not using those terms with any sort of judgment or morality, but that like it is what it is. While still allowing, yes, space for foods I loved, but maybe prioritizing more, higher on the prioritization scale of what I eat, prioritizing more what made me feel good rather than just taste. And over time, my palate evolved, what I craved evolved. It totally changed my life. I often felt like a bottomless pit before I started implementing this. I found myself hungry shortly after eating a lot of the time. I had implemented more regular eating times. I was aiming for fullness. I was aiming for satisfaction. And those foods are designed to short circuit your body's natural signals. They just are. And I wanted to feel more in control. So I stopped eating out as much. I started cooking at home more. I started prioritizing whole foods, vegetables, like just food. Like we all know we should be eating vegetables. But I did it in a way that wasn't diety. It wasn't like I'm going to eat vegetables for a short period of time until I fit in this pair of jeans and then I'm going to stop. I went into this with the mindset of this is forever. I don't ever want to stop doing any of these behaviors. And it totally worked. So those two things, food tracking and reducing ultra-processed food, were pivotal for me. That did not mean abandoning intuitive eating. Again, that meant building on it. But this is where I was able to find the sweet spot and this middle ground. I kept the freedom and flexibility that intuitive eating gave me, but I paired it, or maybe not but, maybe and I paired it with more structure. And that structure helped me, yes, lose weight. And more importantly, feel my best and reach my goals in a way that felt sustainable. So whether your goal is to feel more in control around food, to eat healthier, maybe you have a health concern you're navigating, maybe you want to lose weight in a sustainable way, you want to lose weight and keep the weight off, to feel good in your body, maybe you just want to have more energy for your life, maybe you want all those things, great. Those tools, tracking your food and reducing your ultra-processed foods, can help you get there. The key is to do those two things in a way that feels manageable and sustainable again, and leaves you feeling empowered and not overwhelmed. So this middle ground that I'm talking about is not about me giving you rules or setting your numbers or how much, whatever you should eat. It's not forcing yourself or boxing yourself into a strict framework for eating. It's about taking these tools from everywhere that work for you and creating a balance that feels good for your body, for your mind, for your spirit. And for me, that meant combining what I loved about intuitive eating with more data-driven practical tools like food tracking. It might look different for you. That's totally okay. But I encourage you to be open to experimenting. Don't be afraid of yourself. Don't be afraid of failure. Don't be afraid of being triggered. It's okay to try stuff. It's okay to fail, and it's okay to try again. This is a lifelong journey. I'm not standing here at the end of the road saying, here's me and my ancient wisdom of what I have learned and what you should do. Like, I'm still doing these things. I'm still learning and practicing. Every meal is a practice session. It's okay to take what works from different frameworks and make it your own, whether it's intuitive eating or tracking your macros or something else. You need to figure out what works for you. So I want to wrap up every episode with some options for actionable small steps that you can take. I am such a fan of small steps and just start. So I want to make sure that these podcast episodes feel like, okay, that was nice, like yay, rah, rah, I feel good, but also what are you gonna do? So I wanna give you some options if you're interested in actually changing your behaviors. Number one is to reflect on your current approach to food and just think about, get honest with yourself. Is it working for you? Is there something you want to do differently or something you want to build on? What's working well? What's not working? That's always a great question to ask. I'm probably going to talk more about that question in the future. Not probably. I definitely am, because I love those two questions together. What's working and what's not? Number two is to think about where you need more structure or clarity in your life. Maybe you want to try tracking your food. Maybe it's you want to be more intentional about meal planning. Maybe you want to add a vegetable each day to lunch. I mean, it can be so small, but just think about how you could build that structure for yourself. You don't need to go Google, how to eat more vegetables. Just you think in your own brain, what vegetable do I like and what's available to me and what's easy to keep on hand and what would be an actual way in practice that I could implement this. I'm going to have carrot sticks with my lunch every day this week. So I need to go buy a bag of carrot sticks and put it in my fridge so that every day it's right there. I mean, I'm talking so small. That is how we change. Small. Just start small. Remember that this is not about perfection. It's not about starting a new diet. Here's day one. It's about finding what works for you and your needs. So I hope this feels helpful. I would love to hear what you decide to do. If you are liking this podcast, I would so much appreciate you leaving a review, following, subscribing, wherever you're listening or watching. Come say hi on Instagram. I'm there at HeyStephWebb, and let me know what you're working on. Send me a message. I do have a free download on Instagram that you can find. It's called 10 Books That Change the Way I Eat and Live. That's the free download you can get. And you can also check out my course called Anchor Down, where I teach you the 5 habits for a sustainably healthy life, the 5 habits that made the biggest difference for me. And I dive a little bit deeper in the course than I can in a podcast episode. Next week, we're diving into habits versus systems, habits and systems, and how they really lay the foundation for lasting behavior change. I'm super excited about it. I hope you will join me then. Thanks so much for being here, and I will talk to you next week.